The Brooklyn Vegan Show is a podcast about music brought to you by the music blog and online record store Brooklyn Vegan. Make sure to subscribe to hear all of our upcoming episodes featuring interviews with musicians and more, and find us 24/7 at brooklynvegan.com, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hey, welcome to the new episode of the Brooklyn Vegan Show. I'm BV editor Andrew Sacker, and today's episode is about the best hardcore releases of 2022. This has been a really great year for hardcore. There were so many great records to choose from. And to help me do this, I got Eli Ennis, who has written about hardcore all year for Revolver, and Hugo Reyes, who launched a new column on hardcore this year on The Alternative. Both of these writers are some of my favorite current writers. They both have such great perspective on the genre. They cover so much awesome music. So it was really, really cool to get them together and talk about all the hardcore that came out this year. We all brought our own list to the table for this conversation, and there was definitely some overlap, but all the lists were different, and it was really cool to kind of compare where everybody was coming from different angles as we talked about these great records. It was really, really fun to talk to Eli and Hugo about this stuff, and here's our conversation. All right. Hey, guys. Eli, Hugo, what's up? What's going on?
Not
Nothing
much. Excited
Sunday
to talk about
hardcore podcast matinee.
Yes. We are recording on a Sunday afternoon, so it's a hardcore matinee. So it's been an amazing year for hardcore, and Eli, Hugo, you've both written about hardcore all throughout the year, as have I, and I think the three of us are going to have a really cool conversation about the best hardcore releases of the year. But before we get into specifics, anything you want to say just about how crazy this year has been for the genre and the scene?
yeah, I think it's I think my biggest question going into this year would be like the turnstile effect and how this would match up with this year, but I think it was like very much like a holding serve, and I feel like the biggest events for hardcore were like the festivals, and you can just tell that we're heading into like a really special time, and even looking into next year, like I'm just excited where everything's at, and there seems to be more eyes than I can remember in a while.
Yeah, more eyes, and I think that's obviously been an interesting conversation. But I think I'm equally, if not more, just excited about how much like variety there is in the music. Like I feel like we're really at the crest of a real like it feels like there's a new generation coming into form right now. A lot of younger bands like that Act Like You Know Fest, like all the bands on that bill, and I'm sure some of the bands we're going to be talking about today, like it feels like it's taking us like the 2020s are starting to have an identity this year, and very excited on that.
Yeah, and honestly, when I was making my top 10 for this podcast, I just kind of was like, does all of this count as hardcore? Because it's
Yeah,
we
yeah.
hardcore, and I love all the inclusivity, and hardcore means everything from shoegaze to death metal.
Yeah, pretty
But
much.
sometimes I'm okay, but are we really going to count this as hardcore if we're talking about hardcore releases, or are they more in the scene? And then on the other hand, there are some where I'm like, I feel like this sounds pretty hardcore, but they're not really in the hardcore scene. Does that count? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's just kind of comes with anything in the punk subculture. Is this hardcore? Is this emo? Even when I was making this list, I was like, there's stuff that I might have listened to more that comes from this scene, but I guess I went a little more of a purist kind of route, I guess, but I don't know. It's part of the fun of these conversations.
Yeah, I definitely I have a couple that I may mention at some point where I'm like I decided on not including them, but it would they fit and they come from this world or adjacent to it. And it's I don't know, genre versus scene, all those conversations, they're fun, but they're also they can be a little silly and not even about the music itself sometimes.
Totally.
Definitely.
Um, but yeah, just to piggyback on what you both said, I mean, it's been an amazing year for hardcore. The genre is more diverse and inclusive than ever, more eyes on it than ever. And of course, like I feel like we have already begun to feel like the beginnings of the turnstile effect. In one way or another. Like it's just interesting how, like, I mean, that record came out in August of last year. I feel like it had really popped off by the end of the year, and it just felt like the floodgates were open. And it's cool they spent all year on tour this year, but it's also cool that like they didn't put music out because it just gave like everybody else a chance. Um, and I feel like it'll be fun to look back on this time in like 10, 20 years, and I feel like then we'll fully see like what exactly happened. But right now, it's definitely exciting to be living in it, I think.
Yeah, this is the kind of time that inspires people who weren't around in 20 years to be like, let's recreate that. Like people looking at like Posy Numbers Fest videos now being like, let's do that again. And that's like happening now. And that's really cool to be actively here for it.
Yeah. And it's cool that we're living in this era too of like documentation is so accessible, like Hate 56 and all these podcasts like this one, just talking about like this stuff as it's happening. Like it'll, we won't have to wonder as much what exactly it was like.
Yeah, and you get stuff even like the New York Times like best album was a Gulf Set on
Yeah.
there, which
Yeah,
which was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, which wouldn't have been possible like 20 years ago.
totally
2 years
not.
ago.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
for
that
multiple reasons.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that yeah, that's true.
All right, so on that note, why don't we jump in? Eli, why don't you take us? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna everyone will share their top five hardcore releases. We'll go one by one, kind of like a roundtable format. After that, we'll just more briefly talk about numbers 6 through 10, and then whatever other sort of auxiliary comments get brought up. So Eli, what's your number five hardcore release of 2022?
Probably one that I imagine appears on your guys' list, or at least you guys really liked, which is the Mind Force album, New Lords. Kind of feels like one of the defining hardcore records of this year. I feel like this band, yeah, really has been on the up and up for a few years now, and especially like their hype kind of maintained throughout COVID, and then they're probably one of the biggest bands, newer bands in the genre now. And this comes out, and I think it just really lived up to the hype in a really cool way. I mean, of the like crossovery hardcore, I think Excalibur, their 2018 record, is probably inarguably one of the best of the century in that form. And I feel like this really meets that and doesn't have any lapse in quality, and in turn also pushes their sound in a slightly different direction. There's some like chuggier parts on here, a little more death metal in the leads. I think like this record just positions Mike as like probably the best guitarist in hardcore. I don't really think that's that much of a stretch to say like the how like capable and technical he is, but how much personality he has in his guitar riffs is just pretty breathtaking to hear on these songs. And that matched with the just insane like the most charismatic vocalist Jay in hardcore, or one of them, is like it's quite a dynamic duo. So I love this record, and I'm assuming you guys did too.
Yeah, yeah, it's number four for me. Yeah, and I think even for me, like I wasn't. It took me a while with Excalibur to like totally click into it for some reason, but this one was pretty instant for me. And like I guess the hottest take is I prefer this, and I think what you said is
Mm.
that kind of like the more it has more of the chuggy sort of breakdown stuff in between the thrash, which I really appreciate. And yeah, and I finally got the chance to see them, and they're just amazing live. And one of those bands that I think any hardcore kid can kind of get into. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. As you guessed, Eli, they are on my list as well. I have it at number three. Um, and yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what you said, Hugo. Like, I like Excalibur. It didn't immediately hit me the way it seemed to hit a lot of people. This one hit me like the first time I listened to the first single they put out. Like, it was just, And it's like I went back to Excalibur after, and I was like, well, it's not as drastic a jump as I thought maybe it was, just by how excited I was about it. But it's got like that intangible something where this one just took me right away. And then when I finally heard the whole record, I was just like, oh my God, like what, just like a total whiplash. Like it's so fun. It ends and I want to play it again. It ends and I want to play it a third time. Like it's just absolute blast. I agree with what you said. Like I think any type of hardcore kid could like it. Um, I think that like, Mind Force obviously have like that crossover thrash element. They're like a heavier hardcore band. They definitely appeal to the type of hardcore fan who like, kind of like that more heavier metallic, like in your face, bone crushing, like start a mosh pit type hardcore. But like being in this era now where there's a lot of these like more melodic, accessible hardcore bands, like Mind Force don't do that, but I think that there's something about them that can like bring those fans in too. Like these songs feel catchy to me, even though Jay doesn't really sing. They just like the choruses stick in my head. Like they're shouted, they're barked, but like there's just like a really like kind of sense of song structure I think that they've really developed on this record. And I don't know if like, I feel like they're just not trying to bring anybody new in necessarily. They're just doing what they do. But I think that like that will happen or already has happened, just because the songs are so like there's not a moment and not an ounce of fat on the record. Like every second counts. Everything is structured like super, super well, I think.
Yeah, and like nobody has a vocal delivery like Jay. I think all of the best hardcore bands have that magnetic frontman that you can't quite explain why it's so compelling, but there's something about him that just draws you in even on record.
Yeah. And to both of your guys' point, I think like to me, like I think you could on paper like yeah, sure they're playing like crossover hardcore that has all these metal elements, but like to me, I don't put them in the same category as Power Trip or something like that, where like there's like a bounciness to them and a lightness, and the way they perform is very fun. That I think, like you were saying, Andrew, appeals to people who are into more traditional hardcore because the songs are short and there's a lot of energy, and they're not those riffs are so fucking good, but they're not like the central focus of the song, which is like the hardcore part coming through. It's just very cool. It's very well done.
Would you put them in the same group as Drain?
I would. I think they
Okay.
actually have a lot in common. I feel the same exact way about Drain.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
totally.
I like how I get a lot of like Ride the Lightning from their riffs, but I like how they're
Yeah.
like, here's 13 seconds of Ride the Lightning and then we're out. Like, because like I
Yeah.
love that record, don't get me wrong, one of the greatest records of all time. But like I personally am not the type who needs like Kirk Hammett to take a 6 minute solo. So I kind of like how Mind Force is like, here's a tiny little taste and then it's over and it's like leaves you wanting more. And it's just that kind of thing always just has me coming back.
Yeah. For sure.
Oh man.
All right. So Hugo, what's your number five?
I made a last minute addition because this has been climbing lately. Speed, gang called Speed. Probably one of the rising hardcore bands after their Sound and Fury set. I first became aware of them because of their We See You music video. And like, it might be partially playing towards me because I love Trapped Under Ice and they're doing that kind of 2010s hardcore, but there's something just so, going back to the same thing with Mind Force, there's just something so compelling in the vocals. And like I'm not even the biggest like heavy hardcore person, but this one just really appeals to me in a way I can't explain. It makes me wanna do stupid stuff while in my cubicle at work. um yeah, yeah, it's just like the best version of this kind of metallic hardcore in like 2022 for me.
Totally. Yeah. I also my introduction to Speed was I think that same music video. I think I like saw it going around Twitter and I didn't even like the sound wasn't even on. And I was just like, this band looks so fucking cool. And it definitely I think like you mentioned Sound and Fury, seeing the live videos of Sound and Fury is really what sold me on Speed. And then I like because I had heard the prior EP, and then I heard Game Called Speed. Then I saw those videos and I was like, oh my God. And then I went back to Game Called Speed and I'm like, yeah, like amazing EP. And like, I totally agree with you said, like totally charismatic front person. And it's just like very similar to Mind Force. Like, it's not like it's the most innovative thing in the world, but there's just like something they have that makes them like, they're just Speed and they don't really sound like whoever, they supposedly sound like.
Yeah, and I think this is like the first time they totally hit what they were going for. Like before We See You, I've listened to their other EPs before that, and I just don't think recording wise it was there yet. But I think they really like hit what they're going for finally.
Yeah, this is a band that I feel like I haven't fully jumped on the train for yet. But if I saw them live, I would instantly be like a like a huge fan. I really like so many of the reference points. Like that, I love TUI and like I love heavy hardcore. I think they're objectively really fucking great at what they're doing. But like, I don't know what it is about the vocals that just feels like a little hard for me to connect with. But that new song on the Extermination Volume 4 comp that got released, the video for that, I was like, okay, this one definitely won me. So I think now I need to go back to Game Called Speed again and give another college try because I really want to like this band. I think they're really fucking cool and I love the energy they're bringing right now.
You
Yeah,
should,
yeah, and people who are like really, really care about hardcore. If you listen to interviews with John, like these are people that have been around for a while, and it's just they finally in their late 20s have the band that hit.
yeah, you should drive to New York for Flat Spot World in April and come see Speed's first New York show.
I'd love to. This is like a 10-hour drive for me, but I'd love to.
Hey, it's gonna be worth it.
That's true. Yeah.
um, all right, so my number five is the two EPs by Squint. Um, Squint are a new band this year. The members have been in other bands over the years, but that first EP they put out, just like, I mean, is so entirely my shit and just blew me away and became like one of my most played records of any genre of music all year, which is also really easy because it's 6 minutes long. Um, but it's just like, I think it's hard not to compare them to Drug Church. I think they do a lot of Drug Churchy things, and I think we'll probably end up talking about Drug Church soon too. Um, but like, I love that kind of like loud, anthemic, big, like kind of flirts with alternative rock, but totally rooted in hardcore type stuff. That is like very appealing to me. And Squint do that like really, really well, I think. And like, the feeling I got when I first heard that EP was how I felt when I like first heard the Anxious EP on Triple B, or like when I first heard the first Koyo EP. Like, I was like, okay, like, you just know, like, for people who like melodic hardcore, like, this band's not going to be small for long. Like, and then they put the second EP out, and it's just like more of the same in the best way. And I think now they've got what, a total of 12 minutes of music or something. So I'm just like super, super excited about this band, and like, I just cannot wait to like hear a full length, see them live, like see what they do going forward. I feel like if they keep this like momentum going, I think 2023 is going to be like a big year for Squint.
Yeah, I really like this band a lot. I missed a chance to see them in July, and I'm still kicking myself for that. Like you said, the Drug Church comparison, I still think it's spot on, and it's like it's a good comparison to have right now because it's an easy way to pitch someone kind of thing, like for fans of Military Gun Drug Church. And yeah, I'm hoping that more people get on them because I think even people who are marginally interested in hardcore will find a lot to love in this band.
Yeah, this band's, I mean, it's not entirely like 100% my shit at this moment, but I really admire what they're doing. I love the art. I love the cover art on both those EPs. And I agree. Like, it's just so in vogue right now and feels like it's just speaking to exactly what people want. And I really would like to hear a full length because I think that their sounds could really benefit from being fleshed out across the whole LP. And definitely going to keep listening to them because I think they're onto something for sure.
And yeah, I mean, like Hugo, you brought up like Military Gun. I think also great comparison. If you're unfamiliar, a couple other recommended if you likes. I feel like if you like Title Fight, check out Squint. They the little Bandcamp description was like kind of like Turning Point meets Seaweed. I think that's like really spot on, and also just like a longer way of saying sounds like Drug Church Title Fight.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah, so Drug Church Title Fight, Military Gun, Turning Point, Seaweed,
Fiddlehead,
Anxious, Fiddlehead. Like if
yeah,
that kind of stuff is up your alley, like this is your new favorite band. At least they were
Mhm.
mine. So
yeah. And I think you're spot on where it's like anxious. I remember when they dropped that 2019 promo on Triple B with the Dinosaur Jr. cover. So like anxious, like basically before the pandemic when they're opening for Have Heart and not really exploring exploring the emo pop yet is like the perfect recommendation.
So can we sidebar real quick? Anxious is one of my ones where I'm like, is this a hardcore record? Because that record is just in my like top 10 of the year, all genres. Like I fucking love that record. And they come from this scene and they still play hardcore festivals and they still tour with hardcore bands. But I feel like it's not a hardcore record and it shouldn't be on this list.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um, just just because they're playing hard with hardcore bands, but also they're like kind of making the move towards like emo, like the emo, big emo and pop punk kind of tours. And there's like little parts of Old Anxious, but I'd say it's not a hardcore record. That's yeah, that's where I sit.
I feel like I was I expect One Step Closer, who's kind of the buddy band of Anxious, to
Yeah.
take a similar route with their next project. If I could guess, not it's not a novel guess, but like that new single they dropped, like was both catchier and remains in hardcore in a way that I thought was really cool. The latest One Step Closer song, and like I feel like Anxious and Koyo stand still. Like those bands are just a hair further over the line into pop punk and emo. Whatever, this is semantics at this point. But
Yeah,
yeah, I do. But I do think that they're obviously like in the same boat as bands like Basement, Citizen, early Turnover were 10 years ago, where they were part of the hardcore scene. They were coming out of hardcore. They were playing with hardcore bands. They were loved by hardcore fans, the hardcore adjacent stuff, I guess what you want to call it. But so so obviously more, if not maybe more than ever, an appetite for that sort of thing within the hardcore scene. Uh, for what it's worth.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think, I mean, like Citizen, I think, like, didn't they just take like restraining order on tour? Like, there's definitely a lot of give and take, which is, I mean, to me, like, that's exciting. Like, I don't want to go to a show and see five bands in a row that like all sound like Cro-Mags. Um,
Yeah.
so it's like cool to see like the cross genre pollination and stuff. Yeah, the One Step Closer single, amazing. And I will say though, like, Anxious, Koyo, Standstill, I agree. Like, I think they're like emo and pop punk, but like when you look at, I guess, I don't know, like the fifth wave emo scene, like I
Mhm.
just went to see like Origami Angel and Pool Kids. Great show.
Nice.
Oh, and Insignificant Other were on the bill too. And great band. And then it's just like such a different vibe though than seeing Anxious, like because it's like they don't really fit there either. Like they still have like these like chuggy guitars and like they have like that amp sound that you're not going to get on like, counterintuitive records kind of emo.
yeah,
So like there's still like some, and like, like Grady, like he jumps around on stage like it's a hardcore show. Like so there's, even though like they're obviously, I mean, they're into like the Beach Boys, and that's really evident, I think, on their new single "Where You Been." There's like super Brian Wilson harmonies on that chorus, um, but they still do something that's like directly from hardcore, which I think even like bands like Citizen, it wasn't as direct. Like Anxious are
No.
still kind of like they remind me of like, I guess Title Fight would be a good, like they had that, or like going back another generation, like the Movie Life. Like I feel like the
Mm.
Movie Life were full on in the pop punk emo world. But if you saw them live and like you really listen to those guitars, like they were still always taking like Revelation Records hardcore with them, whereas like, peers like Taking Back Sunday were not doing that.
yeah. and I think there's a deeper conversation to be had in terms of like hardcore indebted emo is very different from like stuff that springs from that's a little more modern in terms of from the emo revival. I think there's a delineation to be had and something I've been pondering for a piece because I think there is a difference between those two because more of the hardcore stuff is going back towards the 2000s. I haven't heard hardcore emo doing Algernon or something.
No.
Totally.
I think that Anxious and Koyo, those bands mentioned, like, are going to be more follow the path of the story so far, who don't get obviously a lot of like emo people or maybe not so into that band. I don't know how you guys feel about that because they're way more in the pop punk, lane. But like that is a band of hardcore guys. Some of them are in a hardcore band now too, and they have always performed with the hardcore energy, always brought out hardcore bands. This was 10 years ago. I think that, and they've been very successful at doing that. And they're straight up playing melodic pop punk music. There's hardcore ish parts in some of their guitar parts, but like I think there's an easy way for any of those bands, and Anxious probably being the best of those of the bunch, to follow in the direct footsteps of them, um, and get really, really big.
So you may know more than me about the story so far, but like I I always felt like they were just like directly like via Newfound Glory, and I just feel like Anxious are more like hardcore kids starting to incorporate more pop influences. So I could be wrong, but I agree. Like Story So Far had like hardcore roots, and you can even see it. Like I saw them with Joyce Manor this year, and like yeah, they're like Parker like clearly wants to be in a hardcore band, but also likes to sing. But I just like don't see Anxious doing that like Newfound Glory vocal style that like really takes it into the full on like defend pop punk kind of world.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I could be wrong, but I feel like it's like a little bit of a different trajectory. But I guess it remains to be
I
seen.
totally think that they have more interesting. I'm saying this as a former defend pop punk kid. When I was in high school, I was totally obsessed with that whole scene when I was 10 years ago. But like, um, Anxious, yeah. But I do think that the Stories so far don't actually have the nasally Newfound Glory vocals that a lot of people I think assume they do because they were in a scene where everyone did. I think Parker's voice is actually pretty gritty and pretty barky, and I hear it so much in, like, to me, I hear like one step closer to me, like I assume those guys can't listen to the story so far, whether they say it or not, or they're at least influenced by everyone who was. And like their vocals sound more like Title Fight meets Parker Cannon than any other hardcore bands to me, or any other emo band for that matter. Like I know Anxious like emo and like the Beach Boys. I don't think Story So Far did, but I don't know. This I guess there's a podcast to be had about the Story
Yeah,
So Far's influence on
yeah.
emo.
I guess we could talk for hours about.
Yes. Uh,
Um. All right.
yeah.
Well, Hugo, do you have anything to add before we hit number
No,
4?
no, that's I'm just enjoying as someone who didn't ever really listen to the story so far. I'm enjoying the
I guess,
conversation.
yeah, that's my I'm the semi
Awesome.
reluctant expert here.
Well, we'll follow up on this, Eli. We'll have to
Cool, cool, cool.
dive into this.
Yeah.
So Eli, why don't you tell us about your number 4?
My number 4 is that Punitive Damage album. This is the Blackout. But this album just really took me off guard. I had liked, I had a couple cursory listens of this band's previous 7 inches before this came out. I was like, yeah, this is good. But this one really, I think they fleshed out their sound into a full length in a way that I didn't really. I think like straight ahead hardcore punk bands have a tough time doing this in a way that feels inventive, in a way that feels, you know, listenable from front to back in 2022, and they just nail it. I think with the variety on this album and how is insanely angry and like foaming at the mouth, rage coming from the vocals the entire time, but not just sort of a bunch of songs that are hurrying to get to the end from the moment they start. They're all short, they're all super fast for the most part, but there's a lot of like really considered guitar parts on here. I think a lot of structures that are pretty interesting, and you know have like cool change ups and whatnot, and really can be pretty surprisingly melodic, given how angry and furious I think these tracks are. Like, for instance, I think the song "Big Man," which is like this 45-second track, has this really rock and roll influenced hardcore to it, like very, like Detroit style hardcore. But then the next track has like a very much like a SSD type, really Boston vibe. And there's other songs on here that, could pretty much be on a set with like some of the like a Chicago band like Chew, like some like the fastcore stuff. Like I think they appeal to a lot of different and explore a lot of different crevices of like traditional American hardcore without sounding like just sort of a boring hodgepodge of, you know, bygone sounds. And I just am always really impressed when a band in the modern day can make stuff that pulls some influences from 40 years ago, but like really, really makes it sound modern and really sounds worthwhile. And I think this record does that. And I've loved it. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, yeah, great record. Um, we talked about it when I had Eli on my
You did,
podcast
yeah.
very briefly, but I said it there, but I think it's might be my favorite hardcore punk record since Restraining Order. And I think what you said, Eli, is like spot on. Hardcore punk in general can be a little stale in the album sort of range. I think EPs are where hardcore punk really shines, at least for my ears right now, and this one somehow pulls off an LP. So like respect.
You brought up like the rock and roll like element. Like they did like a recent like track by track feature for BV, and they were talking about like Springsteen, AC/DC, the Rolling Stones, Kiss. Like you definitely
Oh, hell
get
yeah.
that, I think, come through, even though it's such just like, you know, throat shredding, like caustic hardcore punk. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Hugo, what's up
Yeah,
next?
mine was Mind Force, and I have
Okay.
nothing else to add on it.
Got it. Got it. So mine is the Regulate album. And as mentioned with Squint, I like melodic, anthemic, alternative rock esque hardcore. So hearing Regulate do songs like Hair and In the Moment was like, you know, right up my alley. And then all like the, way harder shit like on this record rules too. And then like the Latin rhythms on that like instrumental track, like it's like totally like so much musical range on this record. And, I think like the turnstile comparison is a little hard to avoid, especially on a song like Hair. But I also think realistically, both bands are probably just very into Bad Brains. And I think that's like really weird. It's like more of a shared influences versus like if anyone would accuse regulative bandwagon jumping, I think they'd be really off the mark. Um, and, I think like the lyrical content on the record, like really pushes it for me too. Cause it's like, yeah, you got these very catchy, fun songs, but then they're singing about like the implicit racism in Eurocentric beauty standards and like police brutality and gentrification and like all this just like, stuff that actually matters and isn't just like macho hardcore posturing or like songs about hanging out with your friends and, kind of. So yeah, I think it's a purposeful and a lot of musical range and just great record.
Yeah, I guess I never wrote the turnstile comparison just never sprung to mind. Is that just because there's like Queen singing on it?
I guess, but I think it's the riffs too. Like specifically the song "Hair." I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong to think that that comparison will be made a lot or has been. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
No, I hear it on that. I do agree with you. I think it's the Bad Brains influence. Sort of like they both have a reverence for like mid 80s New York hardcore. It's just gonna happen. It's just gonna come through that way if you're singing over that style of music. It's
Right.
just you're singing and not barking. You're gonna have similar sounds. But I think also this record is like for as catchy as it is also really really heavy at points in a way that blows
Mm-hmm.
my mind. Like that final song "Cop" is like a total mosher. Like, and this band plays a variety of like they have a good mixture of everything when they play live. Yeah, I love how catchy it is without losing any of the heaviness. I think that's always what I look for. and hardcore record, and this record is very, very forward thinking in that sense.
Yeah, I think like during the single rollout, when they dropped Hair, that's at least when I was like really attuned into this record, where it's like in the moment kind of it's like sprinkled in, but I appreciate the move where it's like, no, we're just gonna sing on the song, and like if that turns somebody off, that's fine. And while still having some heavy parts.
Great
All
cover
right.
art too. Just want to say,
Yes, it is
I
very
love the
cool
cover art.
looking cover art. All right, Eli, what's up next?
My number three is the Terror album, Pain and a Power, which is a record I've been trying to sing the praises of the whole year. It's pretty surprising to me that I like a Terror album in 2022 as much as I do. Like, that's no offense to the band. I just think any band, any hardcore band that's been around for 2 decades, like, there's few that have ever made something this late in their career that I think is potentially the best thing they've ever put out. I really will rock for this album, and it's I think objectively the heaviest Terror record. It's insanely angry and fuming from start to end, but it's also recorded really, really well. I think the songs are written exceptionally well. A good variety of parts, really, really hard, like chugging and just pummeling riffs, but also has the classic groove in there. They brought, Nails, main man, Todd Jones back to the band, sort of as the producer slash songwriter. So you hear his thumbprint all over this. I'm a huge Todd Jones fan, and I just am blown away at how, yes, it's insanely heavy, but it also still has like all the catchiness of Terror and all the anthemicness, throw a hoodie on and stage dive type stuff that they've been doing forever. And um, I don't know. I just like I'm saying this as someone who loves Terror, and I would enjoy a new Terror album, I guess, but don't necessarily before this think I would need to hear any Terror beyond One with the Underdogs. The first two are really low. Those are the low, and that are the ones I thought I was set with for life. But this is right up there for me, and implore anyone who has overlooked this to just give it a go because it's pretty gripping right off the bat.
Yes, this is also my number three.
Oh hell yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
minded.
I
Perfect.
think I'm similar with Eli, where I'm like, I didn't think they could actually do it, especially because like the last couple records post Lowest of the Low were fine. Like I've they're decent Terror records, but I felt like they were like at least like artistically treading water
Yeah,
for me, and I think like bringing back Todd Jones to produce it, who like was in the band, who when they created like my favorite Terror stuff, which is the early like Lowest of the Low. So I think that was like a really smart move, and yeah, it's like you said, Eli, like super heavy and fast. It has all the component Terror parts, but it's crazy that 20 years in they can make a record as good as this. And I think even if you're not a Terror person, like, and you're into the current hardcore moment, like, you should at least give this a shot because it's great.
Yeah, I agree that, I mean, for a band that's been around for 20 years, it's like surprisingly refreshing. But I also think there's like, Terror don't seem like an old band. And I think that also came across when they were like on Sound and Fury, which was, I think a lot of the conversation about that festival pointed out there was like no old head band. And then it was like the oldest band would have been Terror, but like they just didn't come off that way. Like they've kind of just been a relevant band the whole time, and especially right now are like at a new peak. And I also, as far as like, if you're into the new current moment and maybe you're not a Terror person, I really like that they brought in the vocalist from Initiate and Year of the Knife. I think it's like a cool way to like, it's probably mutually beneficial. Like it's probably got some younger hardcore fans to check this record out. And I hope, like for the longtime Terror fans who maybe aren't keeping up, that maybe it shines a light. So I think it's a cool little passing of the torch slash just, you know, trading generational whatever's moment.
Yeah, great record.
All right, so my number three is Mind Force, so I'll skip that and I'll jump into my number two, keep things moving along. My number two is Drug Church, which also honestly, like, is not that much of a hardcore record, but I do feel like Drug Church get to be hardcore. Um, and uh, and yeah, I mean, this has been just like this. I would say I've spent maybe the most amount of time this year listening to this record, just because it's like so ridiculously replayable. Um, I think I may have noticed some recent Twitter conversation about where this ranks in their discography, so I may have some guesses as to. But I honestly think this is their best album yet. I think it's a little bit better than Cheer, which I thought was previously their best album yet. Um, I don't know. It's like the songs are just so good. They stick with you so much. Patrick, as a lyricist and a vocalist, like at the top of his game. Like he's so just like full of wit, just like makes these like just observations and then twists them into these little like poetic turns of phrase, but still just sounds like rough around the edges. And I mean, like the guitars are gigantic. Like they just sound like you're putting your ear up against a full stack. Like it's so produced so well. It's just everything about it. And also, I will say, like, um, seeing the Drug Church tour earlier this year with One Step Closer, Soul Blind, and Lurk, that put this record up a lot for me, because like I went into it as a fan, but seeing those songs live, like I mean, Drug Church were at the top of their game as a live band on this tour, I think, and Patrick was just like just I don't even know what the word is for what he was doing, but he just like looked like a giant on stage. Like he just had like such intense level of command, and it was just like comes so second nature to him. And yeah, I can't say enough about how much I love this album.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what Eli has to say given the Endless Scroll episode.
Yeah, well, in my podcast, I named this album one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and that's not to say that I dislike the record, because Dark Church are just one of my favorite bands, and I just have high standards for them. I'm really glad to hear that it really connected with you, Andrew, 'cause it sounds like you've been into them for a while too, and you also really like Cheer. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some amazing songs on this record. I just think overall, for whatever reason, for me, it doesn't flow as well or hit as hard as Cheer. I think, as much as I always love Patrick's lyrics, I think he was retreading on some of the themes that he hit better on Cheer for me. Um, I do think his vocals are at the top of his game. Like objectively, he worked on his voice to hit some melodies that I don't think he thought he could hit on this record, and I do think that's very impressive. Um, but for whatever reason, I really love Cheer. I really love a lot of the older Dark Church stuff too. So this for me doesn't rank at the top of their discography, and despite I feel like a lot of people I knew were really big up in this record and saying this is the one. And for me, I tried so many times, it just never gave me the satisfaction that some of their other records have. But at the end of the day, a Drug Church record is still a great record, and I'm not trying to trash on it. It's just yeah, for whatever reason, just didn't like blow me away. But there's moments on it that certainly do.
Yeah, I think Cheer is the record for me, and that's I was a latecomer, so that was the record that got me into them, and I was like really excited for this, and I think it's maybe like it's good. It's just not my favorite. So I was originally disappointed, but it's still this was one of them I was debating putting into my top 10, but I was like, is this a hardcore record? And decided against it because even though I was a little disappointed, I keep coming back to it because it's just so catchy and well done that like if I don't know what to put on, the Drug Church record it just suits like so many different environments for me.
Yeah. Now, just to address the negativity in the room, you you're you're sure you've heard the guitar parts to World Impact?
Yeah, I
No,
have.
I know that particular that song is like
Yeah,
I'm like I can't hear that and like sit still.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Detective Lieutenant is like one of my favorite songs of the
that's
yeah.
a
year.
great one.
That is like one of my favorite Drug Church songs. Um,
All
yeah,
right,
I can't really. Yeah, I don't know. I also really have. I have not seen them live on this cycle. I haven't seen them since like 2019 or something. So if I saw some of these songs live, I think my opinion would change too.
that really did do it for me. I think because like I went into the show a little bit like okay, like it sounds kind of like Cheer Part Two, and also I was like, and I don't even know if like there's one individual song like as good as Weed Pin, like, and
Yeah,
then seeing it live, I'm like, man, it's got a lot of songs at least as good as Weed Pin. So I do think seeing them on this record uh, helped push it up, and I recommend doing that. If and I'd be curious to hear if it rises for you if you go catch them soon.
I'll definitely let you know when that happens eventually.
So what's your number two, Eli?
So the number two is a tough one. I really tried to for this list kind of go with what I felt I most gathered the most enjoyment from throughout the year overall. Not try to be like I took my critics cap off a little bit and was like, what do I think I had the most fun with? I think this is the best album, best hardcore album I've heard this year. There's one I think I had more fun with. So this album is the Soul Glow record, Desperate
Okay.
Problems. Like nobody has made an album like this ever. Like this band, like I can't say enough how much of an accomplishment I feel like this record is. Um, I've liked this band for a long time. I think they've been working towards making something of this magnitude for a long time, and this just feels like such a fully realized version of all these ambitions they've had floating around for several years worth of EPs and LPs now. But I just yeah, I mean, this record just blows me away, like how intense and raw it is. And I feel like in some of their previous projects, as much as I can like them, like it almost come across as a little bit overbearing sometimes, where it's like they're writing like really heavy stuff, like lyrically. They're playing really, really aggressively, and I enjoy it, but it's also like kind of hard to just throw on. Like I feel like you have to be in the mood for it, and I feel like to an extent that's maybe diaspora problems, but I also just find myself throwing this album on so much and just having a good time and just sort of like becoming engrossed in it from start to end in a way that is just I don't know, like it really just takes my breath away at how well executed their vision is on here. Um, where it's like so intense and like uncompromising, but also so smart and like so wordy, but also so adventurous. Like there's just so many detours into like straight up like noise rap and just other forms of heavy rock music. I guess I don't. It's hard to even. It's really impossible to put a genre on this. Hardcore, I think, is the easiest catch all. But I don't know. Just like given how complex and multidimensional their music is and these songs are, they're also really catchy. They're also really heavy and sort of like they give you that boost of energy that you get from like a heavier hardcore band. But they're also saying the lyrics are also better than anyone else in the landscape, and that's just kind of like almost so it's so evident. It feels redundant to even say it, but I feel like it has to be said. I don't know. It's a hard record to talk about just because I think it's really, really, really well done. Um, and I assume you guys also have it listed somewhere.
Yeah, this isn't in the top five, but it was number eight. And I feel like I kind of went back and forth in terms of if I wanted to do this because it's like obviously one of the best hardcore records from this year, but I've only listened to it all the way through like two or three times. Like I respect it, but I don't know if like I enjoy listening to it. Um like and I think it's just like the just Pierce is saying so much, and I think sometimes I feel like I'm not like I'm the only way I can listen to it is if I'm reading the words along to
Yeah.
it. And it and it's and like I'm not gonna say I feel like I'm going crazy, but like I I feel weird for not liking this record as much as other people do. But
Well,
it's
not to
still in my
make
top 10, so it's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's still good. I it's just like I don't have the fervor that other people do, and this is just a symptom of being too online, and that I feel like weird about that.
I know that feeling for sure, and not to make you feel weird, but this is my number one. Um, yeah, I mean, Eli, I think you put it really well. I don't know what I can add, but I'll try. It's just like you said, there isn't a record like this. It's like, and yeah, like even with this, like I agree. Like I think if you had to pick one genre, hardcore. But if you call like it's not, it's so much more than hardcore that like that feels so limiting. And also like even when it is hardcore, Soul Glow come at hardcore in such a different way than a lot of the other bands we've been talking about. Like a lot of bands like, you know, kind of came up on a very similar set of influences and channel those influences in kind of similar ways. And like Soul Glow are like they have so much like chaotic 90s screamo in there. A lot of the cadences are like straight up from hip hop. And then like I'm not even talking about the songs where they actually rap, but like even a lot of the hardcore songs, like Pierce has a very like hip hop style to his cadences, I think. And then yeah, like as far as bands in this space that rap go, like nobody raps as good as Soul Glow. Like if Pierce wanted to drop a rap record, it would be actually good. Like it's not like rap rock. When they do rap, it's genuinely it's like they have some of the best hardcore songs of the year on this album, and some of the best rap songs of the year on this album. um and that they can do like the like chilled out like stoned jazzy rap with that last song, or like the song with Mother Mary Rose, which like sounds like it could be
Yeah.
on the radio. Like it's just it's all good, it all works, it all flows so well. I am going to second you on Pierce's lyrics. Like they're just unbelievable. I do agree, Hugo, that like he's saying way too much to like you know like he definitely doesn't do that like sort of hardcore slogan like here's the words, you can learn it in two listens and yell it back at the show. Like I imagine a lot of people have trouble singing along all the words at Soul Glow shows. But I don't know, that doesn't take it away anything from me. It's just his way of expression, and I really like what he does that. And you know his lyricism I think is amazing. um and yeah, it's just like I can understand why some people might consider their record like a bit harder to listen to. But I also think it's really got some moments that like could bring almost anyone in. Like I mean, especially like when like track one, like just the way it opens with the guitar, and then the second the snare drum hits, and then the song like, and that feels like a hit. Like I know it's like a hardcore song and it's like all screamy, but like when I hear that, I'm like, I can like in my head, I picture like that being at like on like a television commercial for like
Hmm.
the hottest new record, and like that's the part they use in the commercial, and you're just like, wow, I have to go buy that. Like that, that might be a really lame thing to say, but like it just like it gives me that like really climactic build up. Like this is starting. You get the sense right off the bat from just a couple simple chords, like something's exciting here, and then boom, snare hits, song comes in, and you're like, oh, this is like a masterpiece, fucking rock
Yeah.
anthem. Um, and I think there's a lot of other good tracks in the record too. I mean, the first single, the crazy name that the one with the Whiplash video,
Yeah.
um, that song is amazing. So many good songs, and their music videos are like probably been my favorite music videos of the year. Um, and to your point, Eli, about like it feels like they've been working towards this. Like it almost seems like everything they did prior was like warm up. Like I
Yeah.
don't I liked all their prior music. I don't want this to come off backhanded at all, but like this is like it feels like a debut. Like it feels like an
Hmm.
announcement of who they are as a band, even though they've got like several other releases. um it's just so huge sounding, and like and that they produced it themselves. I mean, I know Will Yip mixed, and that probably helped, but like they produced the whole record themselves in their house, like during COVID. It's just like
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
crazy.
like they did it's not like they like they're on it's on Epitaph, but it's not like Epitaph put them in the studio with like Ross Robinson or something. Like it's still just what Soul Glow have been doing, but at just like the absolute top of their abilities. And yeah, I love this record.
Yeah, I gotta say, like I feel I really feel where you're coming from, Hugo, because there's a lot of albums every year that I kind of feel the same way about. And with this band in particular, I've always really liked what they've been doing, but I feel like it's an album the previous projects I listened to once or twice and don't come back to them because it's like, when do I want to listen to this? Like it's so much, and this album somehow does like penetrated that for me to where I can just put it on, and I don't really the fact that it was able to accomplish that I think is part of what blows my mind so much because it's like I feel like this was an album I didn't expect to find as replayable and sort of immediately gratifying as it is.
Yeah, and like I went to see them and like it opened the record up a little bit for me, especially like they would play like rap songs as almost interludes in between
Mhm.
their stuff, and being like that close to the pit, it was like it's a very different kind of moshing energy for a solo show compared to like a Mind Force show, and like but yeah, it still hasn't unlocked for me, and it's like I'm like at the like and respect it more than enjoy it, and that's fine.
Sure.
That's totally fine. Yeah, not that you need me to say it, but yeah, I've been so many records. Honestly, there like we could do another podcast about that, but there are so many
Yeah.
records that I'm just already seeing on every list, and I'm just like, I thought that was fine, you know, like, and
Mhm.
not in like a hateful like, oh, this list sucks way. More just like, yeah, I just whatever people hear when they hear this, I don't hear it. So I think we've
Sure.
all been there, and it's. But yeah, I do agree with what you said earlier, like the social media aspect can make you feel crazy. Like you want to feel like you have the right opinion or the same opinion as the people you respect, and sometimes it doesn't happen, and you're like, "Am I nuts?" But
Yeah.
all right. So Eli, I guess are we up to your number one?
I still have to do my
Oh
number
yeah,
two.
Sorry.
Hugo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
bad. My
Hugo's
bad.
too.
You go.
Oh,
Yeah, Hugo. You
you're
do.
good.
Yeah.
We
My
were
bad.
all over
Go
the
ahead,
place there.
Hugo.
Yeah.
Yeah. My number two is Praise. All in a Dream. I I f- I don't know what to say about this one. I really I really love this record a lot. I think a lot of a lot of the recent Rev Summer stuff hasn't totally worked for me. It feels a little bit too close to a recreation of the past. And I think even for Praise, their other stuff before is good, but I think this is a nice step forward where you can still feel the Picciotto sort of inflection, but it's not doing it the Rev Summer thing musically. I think lyrically, I really connected with this. With my top two, it was stuff where it's like not only musically was it like connecting, but like I felt like lyrically it was a little dense. Like I think of the lyric, people aren't one thing, we can grow a lot. Yeah, I really enjoy this one a lot.
Yeah, I agree that the lyrics like put this one over the edge for me. Like take it a lot more than just like sort of Rev Summer worship.
I think this is
Yeah.
a record I have to revisit because I'm not the biggest Rev Summer guy, and I took this album the first time I heard it. It was just sort of like I don't know, it didn't really speak to me. But I've seen a lot of people recently be like, "Yo, this is one of the best of the year," and really talk about the music in a way that has highlighted the lyrics. So you're one of several people I've heard do that recently, Hugo. So I really gotta um, go back to this now and read along as I listen, and hopefully have a more positive connection with it.
Yeah, and I can get it if you're like not a big Rev Summer person. I'm like, in terms of like Like, I'm not even the biggest Rev Summer stuff. Like, as someone who's listened to emo, of course, I've heard all the first wave stuff, but I think this is genuinely like kind of doing something that's a little bit different. It's not like pure pastiche, which is like my issue with some of that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, there's a Husker Du cover on that record, and I feel like praise. I also, in general, I feel like the whole sort of like Twin Cities, like Husker Du type hardcore or post hardcore, has so much more in common with Rev Summer than people seem to talk about, and I think
Hmm.
praise are like pretty good at like being like connecting those dots. So I think that's also a fun aspect of this record.
Totally.
All right, so Eli, number one.
Yeah, so I don't really anticipate that you guys are gonna necessarily agree with with this or be the same page as me here, but I really tried to look to my heart of hearts and pick the record I really had the most fun listening to this year, which is honestly the Gridiron album, No Good at Goodbyes. I have definitely like a heavy hardcore guy. That's my bread and butter is really moshy stuff, and this album does that, and it does that a lot, but it also does rapcore in a way that I've never heard, or is rap style hardcore. I like it when it's done exceedingly well. I really hate it when it's done anything less than that. Um, Cold War or Cold World and TY are like two of my favorite hardcore bands if you want to consider them rapcore adjacent. But you know, I'm not an E Town Concrete fan. I'm not. I'm not really like with a lot of that sort of what I think is pretty corny stuff that's getting revived right now. It's just not really my cup of tea. But for whatever reason, Gridiron are, and I think this album is just like insanely hard for me to put down. I think it's inherently goofy, and I didn't like the span on the 7 inches because I thought it was too much of just sort of like almost like a novelty project where it's like, hey, we're gonna do this very specific style of like beat down from like 1999, and I don't know, it just wasn't really my vibe. But this album like is both self-aware in how over the top it is and how absurd it is. Like the lyrics are outright silly at certain points. 25-8 or whatever, talking about if you're on the bench or in the trench, like all these goofy rhymes, but it doesn't take itself as a joke. And I think that's just like a really hard dynamic to nail, but often leads to some of the best hardcore. And I just think like they've really fully committed to a sound that if you go halfway, it's going to suck utter ass, in my opinion. But they went all the way and own it. And this record is just too fun. Um, Reminds me a lot of I feel similar to it in a way I felt about the God's Hate album last year, where it's like, yeah, this is like superhero comic book hardcore in some ways, where it's very, very, yeah, just insanely moshy and so much personality that it's like almost these cartoonish frontmen, but it's really, really good too. Like I think the songs are done really well. I think the production hits perfectly hard. I think the riffs are very heavy and have like traditional beatdown element, but also a lot of groove and a lot of death metal in the leads that adds a new flavor to this style that's often regurgitated in a really bland way. And I think Carl just has a fantastic voice for this exact type of thing where, he just brings a level of charisma and personality. I don't really care about what he's saying. I think a lot of what he's saying is sort of gibberish, but that doesn't matter because the way he's saying it is so infectious. And I think it's like it's music that's designed for a live environment, but I also have a really great time just sitting in my living room listening to the vinyl of this. And it's another album where like I put it on and I expect to listen to a couple songs and turn it off, and I just can't help but listen to the whole thing through. And I'm just like, God damn, I had a fun time with that. And I haven't seen them live yet. I imagine it would be awesome. Um, so this one was a really big surprise for me. It was not a record I was anticipating this year. It was something I checked out when it came out, just to be like, all right, I'll give it a go. I like to check out anything Triple B puts out, and it's just stuck with me since March. And I guess it's my favorite hardcore album of the year.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I love that enthusiasm, and you are correct that it's not really for me. I'm
Sure.
not a
Yeah.
hater
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
anything. It's just it's not really my vibe.
Sure.
But yeah, I can relate to the feelings that it gives you because that's certainly how I felt about a lot of records this year. So hell yeah to that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the title track is like perfect.
It
Yeah,
is.
and yeah, and I there's like a couple tracks I like on it, but not a record I've like returned to, but it's definitely has like tracks that I think are great, and I think it's like you said, really well done, like sort of rap hardcore, but not like totally my thing. But I think it's one of the best versions of it as of late.
Hell yeah.
So I feel like I can guess what Hugo's number one is, but you tell us.
Um, yeah, my number one is Inclination, Unaltered
Oh,
Perspectives, which I wrote for at Brooklyn Vegan. Thank you, Andrew. Um, like similar to Praise, it's one that I connected to on all levels. I am also just to put it in context, I've been sober for 4 years and now I guess claim Edge, and so it's one that that I connected to a lot. But when I got the promo at first, I was like, I don't. This might not be it, but it was the more personal songs that he talks about his dead best his that are about his dead best friend, that I was like, okay, this is not just like straight edge platitudes, which I like, but it's like Tyler's trying to go a little deeper and like explain his own point of view. And I think not only lyrically, but I think there's a lot of cool mosh parts. I love Commitment to Self. The end does does some reprisals from their old stuff, which is like a move I really appreciate because like you've only been you're a band who just released their debut record and you're already being self-referential, which is just a cool little thing. Yeah, and it was pretty and like talk and it's a little bit of a bias because I wrote a piece about it, so of course I spent a lot of time with this record, but it was pretty evident if I was being true to myself that I'm gonna include this, and this is like one of my favorite hardcore bands going right now.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I love your piece. If you're listening, I think everyone should go read it. It's a really great article that really put the record in perspective for me. Um, and I totally agree with you. Like, I like that. I have no issue with like, I don't know, preachy, straight edge slogans or anything, but he goes so much deeper, and it's just such a personal record. And even the songs that are just about like the straight edge lifestyle, they just feel so much deeper than just sort of like we do this, like you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it felt very like really explored like the depths of why we do this and like what this means to us. And like it was and I will say like for all the talk of lyrics, because I think that especially Hugo, because you are a big influence on my experience with this record, I think the lyrics were like the thing I went in focused on. Really great heavy parts too though.
Oh
Like
yeah, totally.
it's like a fucking great like just produced really well, like great like chuggy metal chorus stuff and just yeah.
Yeah, and I think like to go on the lyrics, it's an interesting perspective because this is someone who's been in hardcore for a long time and been straight edge for a long time, and I think that adds a little bit more wiseness, and it takes a little bit like Epidemic takes more of like a political perspective and kind of looking at the whole idea of Edge from like a lot of different angles. But even if it wasn't as lyrically dense as it was for me, like I still love Isaac Hale's like the way he writes mosh parts in particular. Like so even if the lyrics weren't there, I still think this is a great record.
Yeah, this is just a record I just need to spend more time with. Clearly, I like what I've heard from it. I don't know if I've actually heard it all the way through. I did like your article a lot, Hugo, and meant to check it out and then didn't. So I need to go back to it now because you're making it sound really, really, really cool.
Yeah. All right. So that's everyone's 5 through 1. So Eli, what's your 6 through 10?
All right, so these I don't really didn't really rank these in any specific way, but the other ones I really like this year. Do I just list them off?
Yeah, list them off,
Okay,
and
cool,
we'll,
cool.
if there's anything we want to talk about.
Sure. So the Ankle Biter demo, the Fugitive demo Maniac, the End It EP Unpleasant Living, Contentions EP Summer Offensive, and Killing Pace's debut Killing Pace.
Awesome. The End It EP is also on mine, and that is one that I really really was blown away by, and like um I feel like is gonna like continue to go down as one of the year's sort of like defining hardcore releases.
Yeah, that was
Um,
on my list too.
So yeah, this the only reason I would say this didn't make my top five is because I gotta admit I'm a little disappointed that it wasn't a full length, just because their 2020 EP One Way Track, I could probably say that's one of my favorite hardcore 7 inches ever. I think that's like a perfect 7 inch, and I love this band, and I love every influence they have and the way they're putting them together and their energy. I just think they're so good. I just really wanted it to be fleshed out into a full record, and even if that record was 12 minutes long, this one's it's great. It's so good. It comes and goes a little quicker than I wished it did, but for the time that it's around, like I mean, you're not really going to get a better hardcore song than New Age Slavery,
Yep.
like that. It's just like insanely perfect. I really like Akil's lyrics. I think they're really funny while also being really personal and making a lot of interesting political observations feel very vital without being preachy or even just being like it's more than surface level, more than surface level observations about where we're at right now. And I think they just packed so much into these tiny little songs. Like I don't know, they're an incredible band. I'm going to be seeing them for the first time. It's January. TUI. I think Yuga will be there.
Yep.
I'm really excited for that because I think they're one of my favorite active hardcore bands for sure. I just wish it was a full length. That's my only complaint.
yeah, no, I feel you on that. I mean, I'm hoping they do one eventually.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting thing, I think, like as we like venture into this moment where like hardcore is attracting the attention of people who are not like living and breathing the hardcore scene. I feel like, like expectations like are changing a bit. Like, like I don't know, 7 years ago, you could be a hardcore band and never do a full length and no one says a word about it. But like, if, if you are going to enter like the turnstile realm or something, like, it's like you're going to have a full length that people are going to like talk about. Cause I feel like even though streaming has completely turned the album on its head, there's still something about people want you to be making an album in order to be talking about your music
Mm.
in lists like these.
Yeah, and I
Um,
I think more of the indie audience that's looking at hardcore will take the album a little more seriously than an
yeah,
EP.
I think that too.
I think for this band, it's like if you're my only reason I want them to make a full length is because if you're this good and every song you've made is this good, I just want to hear you make a record. Like I want to hear, like I totally am cool with seven like bands who never go beyond 7 inch. If it's like, all right, I got everything I needed from that band and that 7 inch. It's like I want more of this band every single release they have, just because they're that good. Um, so hopefully get there. If not, whatever. I guess they have a perfect discography of 7 inches, so they win either way. I think.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I certainly I knew that's what you meant, and
No,
that's
I know. I mean,
yeah,
you made a good point though.
yeah, and I feel the same way about like Squint. I'm just like you guys are too good for like 12 minutes of music, so
Sure.
um it's just yeah, I want more of it, so I totally. But I do also like just to compare it to some of the full lengths we did talk about. I think sometimes when like we saw it with Soul Glow, we saw it with Regulate, like you go make a full length and then you experiment a little more and you throw some other surprises in that like weren't going to be on like the very tight 5-song EP. So I would be curious to hear like when End It does make a full length, if and when, like, do we get like surprised by it, like the way that when Soul Glow finally did this, it's like, oh, like this is what I didn't even realize they had been working towards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any others you wanted to expand upon a bit before I throw it to Hugo?
Um, I really like that ankle biter demo. I don't know. I
Yeah,
think I've seen a lot of love
it's
from it
super
from Hugo
good.
and you guys both.
Yeah,
Um,
I debated putting it on my list because I
sure.
really like it too.
It's up there for me too. Not wasn't quite like top 10, but it's up there. I like it a lot. And I'm
Yeah,
very
it's
go ahead.
sorry, Andrew. No,
No, no,
I
no.
just think it's such. I think it really captures where hardcore is going. I think it's going to be a canary in the coal mine in that sense. Like it feels like such a breath of fresh air to be doing this sort of early 2000s more melodic style hardcore, but with a way that feels distinctly influenced by the last several years. Like I know this band is very, very intentional about trying to revive like bands like Mental, and like Bright Brigade and stuff, but like they just sound they're like 20 years old. They just sound like they came up in the world of Angel Dust and Turnstile. And like the inherent melody in those bands and sort of like the general vibe of a lot of the hardcore of the last few years is present in their music, so it doesn't just sound like they're doing pastiche. And I also love that they're very open about not taking themselves too seriously. Like they had a shirt that I saw they were selling at that Act Like You Know Fest that was like, "You like breakdowns, we like hardcore." I just think that's so funny. The art on here, the way that they're sort of carrying themselves just feels very cool to me and very just left enough of what the center has been for the last couple years to strike me as, you know, just very fresh. And I don't know, just I'm really just excited to see where this band goes. And this is a perfect 4-song demo introduction. They already have a really cool sound right off the bat, and I just think that there's no way this band isn't gonna blow the hell up if they continue putting out quality like they have so far.
Yeah. And I really like, how they kind of very intentionally channel like you were saying, like bands like Mental, like these like early 2000s bands that I feel like really had a vibe of their own. And like I just like I just feel like it's basically been 30, 40 years of 80s hardcore worship. Like it just people still are worshiping the same like short era of hardcore. And so like to hear a band come out and much more specifically be channeling like, one of the sort of eras that had its own vibe that was a little bit more recent in history is refreshing because like, there's more to be said, I think, there than there is with just like, oh, so you guys like New York hardcore circa 1986 1989, like never heard that before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know
Or
yeah,
90s for that matter. Anything like I love 90s style hardcore, but like the last 10 years has just been 90s style done over and over and over. It's finally we're getting to this stuff from the early 2000s, like you said, had its own identity, and like it just sounds so new to me. Just like,
hmm
oh my god, what a breath of fresh air to hear someone doing what Ankle
yeah,
Biter's doing.
yeah. I'm glad you pointed out the 2000s revival thing because in doing my column, I think I'm running into more of that stuff. That's popping up like Rejection Pact or there's that band Burning Strong that just put out something that's in that lane. But there's I feel like I haven't heard a lot of locking out stuff, so this definitely stands out.
One of the bands, not quite in my top 10, but one of the records I really liked this year was that Fixation record. And I feel like they're like doing very like American Nightmare, like style hardcore, which I'm a
Totally.
huge fan of. And like, um, same vibe. It's like, very, because like to me, like American Nightmare had such like a very specific like intention as a band, like because they came up around like metalcore and Converge and stuff, and I feel like they were very like reacting against like the metalcore stuff and being like, we're gonna bring it back to kind of like youth crew hardcore, but in this like more modern way that's dark and heavy and kind of like does vibe with bands like Converge, but like shorter, more simple songs. And it's just like that's how I've always sort of perceived American Nightmare. So now to hear a band come out now and kind of like channel that, it's like that vibe feels so fresh to me because it was like so distinctly reactionary to like things that were sort of already like well established, and then like to get it that revived is like exciting to me. Anyway, Hugo, take us to your 6 to 10.
Okay. I did number these.
Oh,
Number 10 is Envision. Number 9, Combust. 8, Soul Glow. 7, Life's Question. And number 6, End It.
nice. Anything you
Um,
feel like expanding on?
I'll do the Envision one because I feel like this one has maybe flown under a lot of radars. Like when I was making this list, this was one where it's like there's probably stuff that's like objectively in quotation marks better, but I've listened to this EP, their EP, and still like a bunch, and it's like kind of the middle point between One Step Closer and Magnitude. It is like very 90s, but I think it has a little bit of modern ears to it. Like the stuff they reference is stuff like Outspoken, but it doesn't really sound like early 90s metallic hardcore. And yeah, I think a lot of people would dig this if they checked it out.
Nice. Well, I need to do that because I haven't heard it.
Uh, Yeah, and the other one, I Life's Question, I was really into for a while. Yeah, yeah, and I feel like that one isn't totally under the radar, but I feel like it hasn't gotten as much love as I thought it should because I thought it was really great sort of leeway New York hardcore.
I need to check that one out. But I just want to say that I did check out Envision upon your recommendation, Hugo. I think you mentioned that when I was on your pod, and really good. Um, I think there's a lot of other cool bands who are straddling that line that you were saying, like sort of following the steps of Magnitude. I think Broken Vow are one of my favorite new younger bands, and they're
Hmm.
right there with Envision in terms of like they're doing Strife style stuff in a more interesting way, or at least a way that feels a little different than how people have been in the past few years. And yeah, really Envision are really really cool. So
Nice. I'm gonna check it out as soon as we get off this call.
Awesome.
Um, before I get to my little list, I have kind of a question. So again, just going back to does this count as hardcore?
this
Does the
is a good
Callous
game.
Cowboys count as hardcore?
Ooh,
Oh,
I'll allow it, but no, I guess it's just because like we have enough time where mathcore is its own distinct thing, and it's pretty separate in terms of the scene from hardcore, but like I think it's close enough compared to something like Anxious.
So
yeah,
if I was including the Callous Cowboys, it would have been in my top five. But I kind of felt like it's probably not really hardcore. Honestly, it's also not even really mathcore. It's like I feel like
it's a lot
there's
of
like
things.
it's like just as much like a Mr. Bungle record or something as it is like a botch record. But shout out to the Callous Cowboys because that's one of my favorites of the year, and just regardless of genre. Um, as far as my other contenders, I guess related question. I wasn't fully sure if I should decide that metalcore counts as hardcore. Um, but so I'm just gonna read off a list of six because some of it's metalcore, and I'm just
Sure.
I got in not really too particular of an order. Speed, who we talked about, Spaced, which I guess was like sort of a comp, sort of new material. The Foreign Hands EP, as well as the two-song single that came after. End It, Candy, Ithaca, and Vane. So I feel like a lot of that's actually metalcore, but
I
that's where I
say
land.
I would say Foreign Hands, and this is where it pretty much comes down to scene over sound. I'd say Foreign Hands, Vein, hardcore, Ithaca, metalcore. I mean, metalcore accepted in hardcore versus metalcore.
And what about Candy?
Oh, Candy, I think that's a hardcore band, but
Yeah,
their
Really?
that record is insanely heavy. It pushes like it's not really metal, but it's like noisy. I don't know, noisy and industrial influence as well.
I
It's
I like
a crazy
almost
record.
place Candy kind of next to like Full of Hell,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like which like I mean I also don't fully know what genre they are, but like that's definitely like whatever that lane is. I feel like Candy's kind of it's like it works with hardcore, it works with metal, it works with noise and industrial, but um I also like I think a lot of it too for me, like as far as just like what counts as what, a lot of it too is like your presentation. Like honestly, like seeing Koyo live, they play like a hardcore band. Candy don't. Like Candy
Sure.
just kind of play like just an in your face, like heavy abrasive band. Like they don't really seem like, they're gonna like go home
There's
and
no
wear
mic
like
grabs.
champion sweatshirts and
Yeah,
like but but I do also think, yeah, just because like Ithaca, to your point, Eli, like they pushed their sound so far in this record. Like, I mean, there's a lot of clean vocals. Not that that's not allowed in hardcore, but I do agree it feels a little more like not maybe this, but I just you know wanted to make sure they got their shout. So
very cool band.
that's where I land with um
Yeah, I think Candy is a hardcore band. There's maybe less so as much like mosh parts on the new one, but like Good to Feel to me is like a hardcore record, so I guess I'd still call them a hardcore band.
Yeah, and they tour. They tour. I saw them with Regulate earlier in the year, and Vane, right? I think Vane were in
yeah,
that
it was
Yep.
tour.
Vein Regulate Candy was the tour, which I sadly missed, but
It was
clearly would
good,
have
and
liked to have been there since all three are on my
yeah,
top 10.
seriously, they all felt
Um,
they're all different shades, but they all felt like they worked together on a bill. It didn't feel awkward.
yeah.
I guess I
Um,
need to revisit the Vane record because I remember feeling a little disappointed by it when I first heard it.
so I was honestly between Vane and Squint for my number 5 slot, and I feel like I kind of gave it to Squint because I'm more excited to hype them because like the Vane record is fairly hyped, but also I definitely played it the most. Like I mean, it's so fun and easy to listen to. The Vane record, I think, kind of what you were saying about solo. Like I don't find the Vane record super easy to throw on.
Hmm.
Um, but if I do commit, I'm like, oh yeah, totally awesome. Um, I think maybe Error Zone hit me a little more immediately. Um, but I just really like what they do. I also really like that new Fleshwater record, which
That's
is like
good.
3 members of Vane. Um, but I love when they bring in like the shoegaziness, and it's such a treat because it's like in this record that's otherwise like so abrasive, and then they finally are like, "Hey, we do also very pretty music," and it's near the end of the record, um, and I like that they have like that. They have just the right amount of new metal without being corny. Um, like you can tell that they're like fans of Slipknot, but like they sound like people that, and this could they if they're listening to this and they're like, you're so wrong, feel free to send me an email and correct me. But they sound like people who maybe got into heavy music through Slipknot and stuff like that, and then found hardcore. And so I feel like you get traces of like those vibes, but through the lens of hardcore versus maybe like through the lens of radio, rock, and new metal and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess I'll give like a slightly longer shout out to Foreign Hands because they're like one of my new favorite bands, and I feel like the new single's even better than the EP, and they just signed to Sharp Tone, which usually means full length record is coming, and I'm hoping that next year is going to be like feel like maybe their year if they put music out or whatever they do it next. I feel like they could sort of become like a uh, a band people focus on.
Yeah, well, I've listened to Separation Souvenir like so many times. I love that song.
So good.
That
Um,
band's really cool.
yeah. And I mean, I guess also I want to shout out like Space. I mean, that's again, it's like the record Space Jams. It's like I think 3 new songs, 2 songs that came out in like December of last year, so we can almost count that as this year. And then like their demo from last year, but they're just like a fun, really good hardcore band who excite me, and like they call themselves Far Out Hardcore, and they have like very psychedelic imagery and their artwork and stuff. And I think the music is like a little bit less far out than,
Yeah.
they call it. But I like that they're into the idea, and it excites me to think that like they're just working towards it. So we'll see if they are. But I like to think that that's what's going to happen.
They put on a good show too. They have a lot of energy. Saw them this year. They were really, really great live. So definitely psyched on that band as well.
Yeah. And speaking of like compilation / new music releases, something that like probably would be like in my top 5 or 10, but I feel like is a little bit more of a 2021 release is the Military Gun, All Roads Lead to the Gun Deluxe. Because that's like one of my most played records, but majority of it was one of my most played records last year. But if you're listening this far in and you haven't heard that one, that's like a great release, I think.
Yeah, that band rules.
All right. Any final thoughts?
No.
The hardcore's in good shape.
Yep.
We covered a lot of ground. That was cool.
That was fun. Yeah. Thanks so much, Hugo and Eli. This was a blast.
Thank you. It was great.
Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks again to Eli and Hugo. If you haven't heard any of the music mentioned on this episode, go check it out. It's all very, very good. We can't recommend it enough. It's been an amazing year for hardcore. I already can't wait for next year. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for our next episode. We kick this episode off with Not That Nice by Speed. And to take us out, here's New Wage Slavery by End It.
Corrupted and empty.